I believe it's Cantor Nimi that is ushering us in today. And
Did everything go? Did you get the text?
am I in the correct
Wonderful.
place? Woot
Perfect.
woot. All right.
Yay. All right. So this is taking that the term that we've used a couple of times, gezerah shava, the idea of pulling a particular word or phrase that connects to another text. I was really struck by the use of the word oz, strength, in Psalm 9, misgav, which is like a haven. It's something that's kept safe because it's kept at a particular height. The root sin gimel bet has to do with being raised up high, so being kept safe because it's being kept up high and above harm, and of course azamera, I will sing. What's really fascinating is this is Rabbi Joshua Shosky's setting of this text, and he likes to talk about how the last phrase Uzi elecha azamera could be read either as "O my strength, to you I will sing," as in referring to God as one's strength, or "I will sing my strength to you." And that both meanings are contained within the phrase, and they both can resonate with one another in a really beautiful and meaningful way. This idea of singing our strength to one another and singing to God as our strength. Va'ani ashir uzecha va'arane laboker chasdecha ki hayita niskav li umanos beyom tzari va'ani ashir uzecha Arane la boker chasdecha ki hayita miskavni umanos beyom tari uzi eilecha azamera
Beautiful. We do one of Warshawski's, his Lecha Dodi, which is a favorite at CBST.
I know. I think I brought that the
Did
first
you?
and only time I ever led worship services at CBST, the April before I left New York.
You were the one who brought it? I love that setting
I wrote it out for Joyce.
Oh, wow. So thank you. Where is he based? Do you know?
I'm not 100%. I know that he does a lot of, I'm trying to remember if he has his own shul. I know he does a lot of consulting work.
He's a very talented composer.
Very talented songwriter, composer. He came through the Ramah.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Beautiful. Thank you. All right. So we're going to dive into, if we could do the Levi, we're up to verse 14 on the Levi. We're going to keep moving through, and we'll do a little of the grammar, but I'll try and keep, I wanted to finish the Levi and look at a little altar today, if we can. Levi, since this is a long psalm, 21 verses, although believe me, there are longer ones, but this is the longest one we've yet encountered. I would encourage people, if you feel a little lost in it, to spend time in the afternoon or during this week while we're studying, to go through it line by line and do the very kind of the simple level task. And it's not simple, but I mean the of really going through line by line and trying to say, what does this line mean to me? And you'll start to see the rhythm of the psalm. And we're going through it a little bit disjointed, but because it's so long, it feels that way, but it will pull together as we go through. So line 14, we heard it, so I'm going to go into English. Now the H there is, you'll see it's bolded. Again, Levi is emphasizing the acrostic nature. The H is here because the chet, if you look at the Hebrew, where the 14 is on the right side, next to the 14, for those who can't read Hebrew, the chet is bolded. So Levi is coming up with H, which doesn't correspond sound-wise, because the chet is a guttural, but it does come up with he's trying to keep it to the Hebrew alphabet, the English alphabet. So Hananeni, have favor upon me, Yud He Vav He, and he puts Adonai. Again, we talked about why Adonai is for Yud He Vav He. See what I suffer, Re'eh. Again, the shoresh, the root for the word to see, repeats Resh Aleph Hey, Re'eh, see what I suffer from those who hate me. A very, very powerful line. So here's another word, those who hate me, misonai, at the end of that sentence. Sonai, haters, is another word for evil we see about enemies. So that's a very powerful one, because we all can experience. Some of these are more accessible. Hold on, I have to turn the AC back on. I turned it off. I'm experimenting with how to make this room comfortable. So sonai, haters, is another word that gets used, we'll see, along with Russia, bad, or oyev, enemies. And I think all of us can relate a little bit more easily. We don't bristle as much to the word like enemy, although I have to say, I think all of us in America, people in Bulgaria and the rest of the world, have been much more sophisticated about this in general than Americans. And I think Americans are beginning to understand what it is to have people who really are enemies, and the fear of that, even the external ones. For many years, we were uncomfortable even talking about that, but I think we watch what's happening to this country and we understand there are people who feel like they are out to destroy us, and that's a terrifying, terrifying reality. So see what I suffer from those who hate me. Now that can be very personal. That doesn't have to be on a national or communal or political level. We know that feeling from those who hate me. Miromami, you who pull me, misha'are mavet. Now this is a very interesting translation. You pull me, misha'are, here we come, here's this word, sha'ar, gate, mavet, of the gates of death. Now where he gets portals of the sleep is very interesting. Let's leave that for a moment. But here we have the gates of death. You who pull me, lift me up from the gates of death. Lema'an asapra, that I might tell your tehilotecha, your psalms of praise. Remember Tehillah, here's like Sefer Tehillim. Bishare vatzion agila bishuatecha. At the portals, at the gates. Remember, we saw this when we did the first translation. Sha'arei, here's the repetition of Shar. At the gates of the daughter Zion. Remember, some of us didn't like that in Sepharia, it was fair. Why our daughter? What does daughter Zion mean? That's a very, what does daughter of Zion mean? I just want to read what where he has this. Originally, a mountain in Jerusalem came to represent both the city of Jerusalem and the land of Israel. It is personalized as daughter, Bat Zion. So he is here understanding Zion to mean Heart Zion, Mount Zion. And this is where the word Zionism comes from, is the use of this word biblically. Zion means usually in biblical sense, it's not clear that his translation, he's making a decision. But sometimes Zion means Mount Zion, which is one of the 7 hills of Jerusalem. And Har Zion, Mount Zion, is one of the mountains of Jerusalem. Sometimes Jerusalem gets called Zion, And this is where the word Zion for Zionism even comes from. Not this particular psalm, but the word. And Zion, with this tzadi as the first word, Zion gets transliterated into English as Z for Zion. But we don't really know what Vat Zion means. He's right. Sometimes it is used just as a general personification of Zion. In the pit they have made, and you see the I is again bolded as part of the acrostic, the nations sink down. In this net where they hid, their own foot is caught. Adonai is known having done justice. Transgressors are trapped through the work of their hands. So you see what this psalm does continually is to contrast where justice exists in the world and where injustice exists. So for the psalmist, where you hear transgressors and haters and enemies, those are people or the world committed to injustice, to the opposite of justice. And where justice exists, those are the qualities of the one who created the universe, to whom we aspire to imitate. We want, Adonai is known having done justice. So this psalm is saying the one who created the universe is just, and justice is the reflection of that power. And we human beings, our job is to reflect it. Transgressors, meaning those who do injustice in this contrasting verse, are trapped through the work of their hands. And I like that he says music here. He wants to make clear this is a dramatic moment. And where does he get that from? Where does he get the music here? He's translating, so if you look at 17, he's translating the word higayon, which we've come across before, as an indicator for music. So what he does is he's putting it in the parentheses to show that he believes that higayon is not a word of the psalm itself, but a direction, like you would have in, what's it called? Like when you have presto, what are those words called? When you are playing music or you look at music and it tells you to sing it fast or play it slow or play it quietly or that kind of thing. He's seeing it as an indicator that this is a place for music. So I love that. I love that he actually got, one thing I just love about Levy's translations is that he really tries to apply the translation, so to speak. I want to read you something here. He says, remember? So he writes, the Hebrew is higayon, a word that in Psalm 92 is followed by the word kinor, which we learned from Lisa Brown is one of the musical instruments, sometimes known as a harp. Since we do not know exactly what kind of instrument the higayon was, we have translated it like a stage direction, similar to those following often the word lamanetseach. Jaws 18, jaws of Sheol. And remember we talked about Sheol is some version of post-death or another world in which gets translated simply as hell, but I think that's too simple because we have very Christian images of hell, so we don't really know what Sheol looks like. But I like that he uses jaws of Sheol. Honestly, I don't really get where he gets the jaws part. If anybody sees where, let me see if he says jaws. Okay, he says, we have added jaws. He does it to continue the acrostic. He doesn't get it from the Hebrew at all. He just wants to show the acrostic. And backsliding to echo the point made in verse 4, that while good people return to the good path, wicked people slide into Sheol. 19, along with all peoples who forget there is a God. Now this, again, the psalmist is saying, remembering what it means to remember there is a God for the psalmist is to remember there is justice and goodness, and our job as human being is to imitate God. If you forget there is God, it means for the psalmist you're forgetting about justice and goodness. 19, hold on. Keep your faith. Again, the K there is to keep up with the acrostic. The needy will not be forgotten forever. The hope of the poor will not perish, not ever. Arise, Adonai, let not mere mortals prevail. Let nations be judged by your presence. Bestow, Adonai, terror for them. Let peoples know. Mere mortals are they, Selah. Okay, any comments or questions about this? So we have, let me see if you can raise hands in your, boy. All right, you ready to look at altar?
I see Stacy physically raising her hand in her rectangle. If anybody can, y'all just go to the participants and hit raise your hand. That would help me out tremendously. But Stacy, I physically see you got your hand up, my dear. So go ahead.
Practice using it though in the participants. It's a lot easier for us to keep track.
I'm sorry, I didn't know how to do that, so I apologize.
So I want you to learn, Stacy. Let's take a minute to learn, okay? Can you go down to where it says participants? Do you see that?
Yes.
If you click on that.
Do I click on more?
It
doesn't say it.
Yes.
Oh, there it is. I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
Yay! You got it. Now you know how to do it. See?
Thank you, Rabbi. I appreciate
You're welcome,
that.
Stacey.
And all of a sudden, 8 billion hands pop up. Yay, I'm so impressed with everybody. Yay, all right.
Stacey,
I'm going
go
to take
ahead.
you, Stacy. Go ahead.
Oh, it's a quick question. I think it's the Sheol. Like you say, so we don't translate it as hell. So do we translate it as unknown fear or something?
Well, that's why they leave it as Sheol often, because we don't really know what it is. It's some kind of post-death place, and there's a lot written about it in different places, but we don't really know. So I don't like the word hell because it just evokes images of a red devil and fire and brimstone.
Yeah.
So but you can see that's why many translators just leave it as Sheol. So it's kind of an unknown.
Thank you.
All right, Jeremy Lawrence, you're next.
Hi. In line 19, line 19.
Okay, let me get there. Yep.
Tikva, Enoim,
Yep.
Anim. I think we talked about this and I can't remember what that is.
So this is a situation where we think there's a scribal error, which I love that phrase because it just means the word doesn't exactly make sense. So you can see different. So here he has it. You see where it's a little faded out.
Yeah.
So you'll see. Let me just show you. Hold on, just a second. It means there's a confusion about what should be read and what is actually written there. So I'm looking at my original one. So Aniim is what's written. What's in the bold is what's actually we have written. But he's arguing, and along with many other people, that it should be read Anavim, which means humble.
Thank you.
So you'll see that, and by the way, this exists actually also in the Chumash, and when people are reading Torah, there are some words that are written one way, but we traditionally read them a different way. If any of our Torah readers have anything else to say about that, but we have a bunch of them. It's not actually rare. I wouldn't say it's common, but I don't know, but it's not rare, but it is. We have different ways of reading some words because either the original word doesn't make sense, or we think a traditional Jew would say there's a reason that God put it like that, and other Jews will say there was a scribal error along the way and somebody made a goof, and so we have to make up for the goof. Jacob, do you have anything else to say about that that's more intelligent?
Just to say that when the Masoretes, when the school in Tiberias pointed the biblical text and came up with the vowel system and cantillation system, they were relying on oral tradition for those symbols, and similarly for these, we call it like kativ kari, like what's written versus what's read. They were relying on what they knew of the oral tradition, like what do people actually say when they read this word, and if it didn't match what was in the unvoweled Torah text, they're like, oh, it just means you see this, but you read this. They didn't even get into whether it should be there or shouldn't be there.
Right.
They just said, you see this, you read that.
So it means when you look at the book from which people practice laning, Jeremy, I don't know where you are, so I'm not.
Here
Oh,
I
there
am.
you are. There you are. When you look at the book, which is called the Tikkun, that you practice reading from, it will have it in the column next to, in the margin, next to where the text is. But when you're looking at the Torah reading, the scroll itself, it only has the written. So that's part of the thing that a Torah reader has to know. Jacob, would you agree with me? It's not rare, but it's not, I mean,
It's common enough that
yeah, it's common enough.
that any Torah reader needs to be aware of it, because you'll come across it at least a few times in any Torah portion, if not more so.
But so this is an example where the Psalm puts it where we have it in the body of the text, because it's not the Sefer Torah, where you wouldn't see, if this were the Chumash, the 5 books of Moses, you wouldn't see it like this, where it's within the body of the text. It would be on the side, not of the parchment part. It's not there at all. But on the book that from which you study, it's it's kind of marginalia. So you would have to, you look there and you notice it, and therefore it tells you how to read it. Exactly what Jacob said. It's how to be read, not what's written. And it's a part of learning how to read. But for those of us who study the text, we try to understand what's happening there. It's often, I believe, a scribal error, or just things pass on and on and on. And we've even seen it in some of your original writings, that there is a mistake that's made between your handing in a writing and how it gets, and then it gets codified, and people then study it for generations. Other questions or comments?
I have a question from Doug. Doug has his hand up. Can you please unmute yourself? Doug or Susan, whoever.
Please forgive my simplicity, but why should I accept that throughout this psalm, that the psalmist is correct, that God is just and that God is righteous? Where is
I'm not saying that you should accept it. I'm saying that's what the psalmist is saying. You don't have to accept it. That's what the author of this is saying. So that's the point of view of the psalm. You don't have to accept it. It's like reading a poem that you don't agree with, or reading anything you don't agree with. But the psalmist makes this distinction over and over and over again. That you see from verses 4 through 7, for instance, there's a description of those who are against those things that are just, and a description of, then starting in Psalm 8, a description of God who is just. So that you don't have to agree with it. Absolutely, that's your point of view. But that is the point of view of the psalm.
Okay.
And we can argue it, we can debate with it, we can say the psalmist is wrong, but the psalmist is trying to say, don't think of God as just the guy up in the sky, a white guy with a long white beard who's, dispensing justice. A Reconstructionist perspective would be, for instance, God is a verb, so to speak. The psalmist is saying God is being just. God is caring for the poor, the needy, exactly what the psalmist is saying. That God is protecting the oppressed. And that's what God is in the world. And that's what we need to be. Those people who oppress the poor, those people who are not just, those people who don't do all of these things, those people will be trapped through the work of their hands. Those people are forgetting justice. So this psalm is saying that justice itself is God, that the good work in the world protecting the poor is God. Not that God only is just, but that justice itself is an expression of the divine presence in the universe. And anything that pushes that out is anti-divine, so to speak.
Okay,
So
well,
that's what the perspective of the
That's a
psalm.
good definition of what God is. That's basically a definition of what God is.
It's theology. It's trying to understand, what does it mean to talk about godliness? And I would say, in a Marxist way, we've reified God, right? We've we have reduced God to this very narrow little box of a creature that somehow manipulates the universe. The psalmist is saying it's much bigger than that. The things in the world that stand for justice, that's what God is. The things in the world that stand for the poor, that's what God is. The things in the world that stand for right in the face of evil, that's what God is.
But the psalmist is predicting that this God will overcome, will succeed.
This psalmist is predicting that justice will succeed. This psalmist is predicting that good will succeed. Not necessarily in your lifetime. Who are you to think that you have that amount of power? Not necessarily in my lifetime. That's a very anthropomorphic and human-focused perspective. There is a world, there's a perspective that this psalmist is saying is so much bigger than any one of us. We can't be the narcissists that humans are, which is what the final sentence is. Yadu goyim enosh hema. Part of what it is to really understand what God is to understand what human beings are. And human beings are not, human beings are mortal. Human beings are finite. Infinite is something different. So theology likes to talk about this question. God is a predicate, meaning that God is that trying to kind of come up with that God is a puppeteer that says, oh, that person is going to get punished. This person is going to, it's much, 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 much bigger and deeper than that. And it takes the ability to play with the word infinite to think bigger. So yes, we would all love to see good people thrive and bad people get punished on a scale we can all understand. This psalmist is saying it's bigger than all of us. We might not be able to understand it. And honestly, that's what faith is. And that's why it might not be satisfying, because empiricism doesn't always play out that the people who oppress the poor suffer. They don't always.
Thank you.
But there's it's asking us to think on a much, much bigger arc and a much bigger scale.
Okay.
All right, Shep, you have your hand up. Go ahead and unmute yourself, please.
Yeah, so the word that's actually written is this word aniim. What does that mean?
I'm sorry, Shep, the word what? I wanted to get another
The
go.
word that's actually written, not the anavim, aniim. What does that mean? The one that's the mistake. Does that have a meaning?
It's not clear. It doesn't really have a meaning. It could be related to the word for poor, but it's not clear. It doesn't really make total sense.
The other thing is, doesn't anavim mean grapes? It's spelled differently. Anavim. It's not, I thought that meant grapes or something, no?
I think that's spelled differently.
Yeah,
Oh, with an aleph?
I'm trying to think how it is.
With a iron on.
Oh, okay. Okay, sorry. Thanks.
I'm not sure. Yeah, I'm not sure. We could look it up. If somebody could look it up, that'd be great. Anybody else?
Adria, she has her hand up. Go ahead and unmute yourself.
Not knowing the Psalms very well and being a newbie at all of this, it seems to me at this point we've arrived at it, or for me, I've arrived at a psalm.
Sorry, it's hard to hear you. Sorry.
I'm sorry. It seems to me that for me that at this point I've arrived at a psalm that whose content is very deep, intense, and weighty in a way that the others have not been.
Yeah.
And not only due to its length, just due to the concepts, the way it's constructed, and the language of it, even in English. Is this the way the Psalms are built so that it kind of reaches an ultimate climax as we go forward?
I have never really seen how the order of the Psalms has an arc to it that makes sense. That's what I mean. Like it's really, I think it makes sense to start with number 1 and end with 150. I can argue about those two Psalms, but within from 2 to 149, it jumps around a lot.
Okay.
I wouldn't say, I agree that, and also partly that we've built up lengthwise, so it does feel denser. I agree that it feels denser. I think the arguments, so to speak, that the psalmist is making have a lot more, it does feel like a denser psalm.
All right, thanks.
But you'll see, we're going to come to like Psalm 13, I think it is quite short and quite direct in a way that we've, there are different ones. So I love Psalm 13 because of that in some ways. This one does take more work.
All
I
right,
think you're
Lori.
right about that.
Lori Spear, can you unmute yourself? You are next.
Yeah. Okay. It seemed to me that the psalm was about nations and nations attacking Zion. And then I thought verse 19 seemed to be like such a change of scale from the concerns about the nation and the people down to the individual poor person. And then we went back to nations at the end. And it just kind of jumped out at me.
Well, throughout our text, it's pretty clear that if you don't take care of needy, if you don't take care of the poor, if you don't take care of the vulnerable, on an individual basis and on a nation basis, you're doomed. You'll see that throughout the Jewish texts. Every nation is judged by how the most vulnerable are taken care of throughout the Bible. And so this is no different. Now, I will keep arguing that every psalm can be read external or internal in terms of enemies and in terms of who it's directed to. But I think you're right. There's a lot of references, of course, to goyim, to the various peoples. But I still think it can be read very personally. And over and again, you'll see, we'll look at it again with another piece, how it goes back and forth between this contrast, what it means to perish from the presence. And I've talked about this in other times, and I'll bring it up now again, and you'll hear it from me over and over again. There's a lot of reference to what it means to be in the presence of the divine and what it is to be away from the presence of the divine, what it means to experience God's presence and what it means to experience God's absence. And the point of a religious life, I believe, and the point of life, I believe, is to diminish the gap between that which is transcendent and that which is human or mortal. And our aspiration to have meaning and purpose in life, to be able to feel like our lives are justified, that we're justifying the rent we pay, so to speak, by being on this planet. You can use all different kind of language to describe what that is. But ultimately, for me, the language of the Psalms is saying it's about diminishing the gap between the earthly and the heaven, so to speak, between the mortal and the immortal, between the finite human experience and the infinite experience of the transcendent, between saying that which is eternal, that which is not affected by passing trends of political whatever, and that which is eternal. We want to diminish that gap in our lifetime. And we want to fill our lives with things that attach us to that which is eternal, to that which is profound rather than only that which is prosaic. So I think that's a piece of what the psalmist is saying. So if you look at verse 4, the end of verse 4, his translation is, they perish from your presence. That means the gap is, what are the ways we can live that diminish the gap between the human and the transcendent? And what are the ways that we increase the gap between the human and the transcendent? This psalmist is saying, well, it's pretty clear. Let's read it this way. Here are the ways that my enemies, meaning those that are less interested in, if we read it, those who want to increase the gap between the human and the transcendent fall over themselves. They perish from your presence. You have rendered a judgment of justice. You sit on the bench as a just judge. You have blotted out their name from forever. Those who want to diminish God's presence in the world, and by that I don't mean one religion or another religion, I mean transcendent. That things which are holy, justice, caring for the needy, making sure the sick are protected, making sure the weak and the vulnerable are protected. Those who do not do those things will turn to eternal desolation, and those cities will not ultimately last. Can anybody really argue with that? Right? We might not see it in this moment, but I think we have to understand that a society in which only the rich are given privilege will not last. It will not last. Empires have fallen precisely because of this. And we can see it happening here, right? I mean, there is no way a society that only takes care of the rich will survive. Doesn't mean it's going to happen in our lifetime. But what will be forever? What will be Li'olam and Li'olam Va'ed, which is repeated throughout this psalm? If we look through what Hebrew words are repeated, the contrast between what is eternal and what is finite, what is lasting and what will be passing ultimately. And over again, the contrast is made. What is forever? What is eternal? Justice, righteousness, fighting for the oppressed, not those who don't abandon those who are weak. I'm just reading through. Those who don't forget the groaning of humble people. Those are the things those efforts will be eternal. The psalmist is encouraging us, reminding us that even if it feels hard and it feels like we're being defeated in the moment, don't despair. These things will have lasting power, even if you feel like it's not looking that way now. But in the pit they have made, the nations will ultimately sink down. This is in this net where they hid, their own foot is caught. Adonai, the transcendent is just. The others will be trapped through the work of their own hands. The needy will not be forgotten forever. The hope of the poor will not perish forever. Let nations, let everybody be judged by these terms of the justice of the eternal. And let everyone remember, Enosh Hema, that we are only people. Okay, comments and questions, and then we'll...
Okay, Robin has their hand up, so if you can unmute yourself, that would be great.
Well, that was very profound, Rabbi. Thank you for that last part. So my question is about God's time. I don't even know how to quite ask this, but I'm going to try.
Can you just speak up a little bit? It's hard. I don't know. Maybe it's my air conditioner that's making it hard for me to hear everybody.
I'm pretty close to my thing here.
Okay, so sorry about that. I think it's because I have this new air conditioner, but I'm very comfortable, so I'm very happy.
That's important.
It's not 85 degrees in this room.
So my question is about our sense or the psalmist's sense of what God's time is. That we hear, it sounds like the enemy will be forever defeated. It's over, finished. And yet, every other line, we got a new enemy to deal with. And then the other part is forever, we can find the wisdom in your eternity, but we have to be constantly reminded of it. So that going back and forth.
So I think the psalmist would argue we're not doing enough to create justice in the world. We're not doing enough God's not going to fight. We are the ones who have to be because we're human beings, we have to be the hands, the eyes, we have to be the agents of all of these things of the transcendent. So it's not like we have to sit around and wait.
So it's an eternal cha-cha. It's
an eternal cha-cha, and it's never ending. And guess what? I hate to tell it to you. We never actually get there. We have to keep aspiring.
The myth of Sisyphus. I got it. Okay, thank you.
Well, I wouldn't say it's Sisyphus because I think that it's not, I don't think it's, Sisyphus, one would argue, is without meaning.
No.
There's no meaning to Sisyphus, right? I mean, it's a long time since I've read that, but there's meaning to this. This is what gives us meaning as human beings. This is what pays the rent for us having a life. I mean, Sisyphus, it was meaningless, and that's part of the problem of Sisyphus, right? There's a great commentary actually about what was so bad about the slavery that the Israelites, why was slavery so bad, right? And they said, there's a great commentary that I think it's either Rashi or Rashbam, I can't remember, in the beginning of Exodus, where it says, it describes the labor of the slaves as beforach, as being ruthlessly enslaved. What does ruthless mean? If you have to do work that has no meaning and no time limit, anybody could deal with meaningless work if it has a time limit, right? You know, I mean, you have to do shit work sometimes in life, but you know it's not going to be forever. Or you could do meaningful work forever. Either one. You can't have meaningless work and have no time limit on it. It will crush your soul. So that's what I feel like Sisyphus is. It's just meaningless work forever. It can't have, but what this is saying, there is meaningful work we have to do as human beings, and that will give us strength. And again, somebody, Camus said Sisyphus was happy. Okay, I am not a Sisyphus expert, so I'm pretending I know something. I don't. So Sisyphus was happy. Great. Okay. So I shouldn't use Sisyphus because I don't really know what I'm talking about. But
right.
I know the psalm. I understand the psalm, I think.
So let me just, I got that. But the sense of God's time, or our sense of God's time, is it different? Or how human beings view time and how?
Here's what I would say. This is what gives me so much strength in these days we're in right now. It's not, we don't know about time. We only know our little lives. I mean, how long do we live? You know, my mother lived to be 95, and that's pretty long. I mean, and how much is 95 years? You know, I'm 61. You know, what do I really know about the world? What do I really know about the universe? Part of what this psalm is teaching us is humility as human beings. And human beings don't have enough humility, right? I mean, look at the world we're in. We talked about this with Psalm 8, this creation psalm. Human beings think we control animals and the planet. The arrogance of the human experiments is pretty horrifying. I think probably most of us agree, watching the arrogance. So this isn't saying the opposite of arrogance is feeling bad about ourselves. It's humility. And humility is a powerful and important trait that we don't have enough in the human condition. The arrogance is going to kill us all. So that's what I would say. We don't know what the timeline is, and we have to imagine it's much bigger than any of our lifetimes. And my job is not to make sure that everything's solved in my lifetime. If I thought the work I did, I had to see results from in my lifetime, that's pretty discouraging. And that's why I think so many of us are so depressed. But if we imagine we're part of a chain that's much bigger and we're laying a foundation, maybe if we make a strong enough foundation, maybe in 2 generations it'll get solved. Who knows? But then I have a very different perspective on what my job is in the world.
All right, Mark Epstein, please unmute yourself.
Hi.
You're Middle Eastern.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yeah. So my question is, all right, this is only my second Psalm class. I have an odd schedule.
Welcome, Mark.
So I'm only able to attend occasionally, but, and maybe my question's been answered before, but I'll ask. In this Psalm, the psalmist is talking about justice, and I'm sure he has a clear idea of what justice is, but is there some universal definition of justice? I mean, one person might think this is justice, another person might think this is justice. I mean, maybe one person thinks Bikur Cholim is justice, another person might think treating your workers fairly, that's justice. I mean, is there some kind of like overarching way to define what is just?
That's a great question, actually, Mark. I would say this psalmist leaves some of it open, and that's something that we have to all figure out. But the psalm does talk about the poor and the needy and oppressed. So that's in this particular psalm that is mentioned. But we're going to look at tomorrow. I think we're going to skip to Bernstein's psalm. We're not going to do Altar tomorrow. We're going to do Bernstein to see she does it entirely as a personal psalm. And I really want people, before we look at hers tomorrow as a class, really try this afternoon to write this psalm for you if you were writing a personal psalm, out of the nation level, and just see if you could do anything personal with it. And then we're going to look and see what she did. Just for an exercise, as a exercise, not as a because I think that's the only way to read it. And then I want to look at what she does tomorrow. All right, I think we're at a time, right? So
We are.
And Jacob, are you?
I'm here. A little bit verklempt. This brought up, I had a chaplain colleague named Carlos who's terminally ill, who, when he was at once asked by a friend what he prayed for himself, he said, that I may always know that God is with me.
Uh-huh.
And I just realized that I've lost touch with him, and I actually don't know if he's still
Wow.
alive. And so I'm just going to dedicate this to him.
Beautiful. Thank you.
Ani ashir uzecha va'arane laboker chasdecha ki hayita niskavni umanos biyom tzarli va'ani ashir uzecha va'arane laboker chasdecha ki hayita niskavni umanos biyom tzarli uzi eilecha azamera uzi eilecha azamera uzi eilecha azamera uzi eilecha azamera ani ashir uzecha va'arane laboker chasdecha ki hayita niskavli umanos biyom tzarli.
Beautiful. Thank you, everybody. So I'll see you tomorrow at 10, and we'll look at the Bernstein. I think Harold sent it to you, right, in the packet of Psalm 9. But try and write your
I'll
own
look.
personal version for tomorrow. Okay, see everybody tomorrow. Thank you for your great questions and responses. I'm going to go read about Sisyphus now.